welcome to The Point World Affairs. I'm Cha Sang-mi. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has clearly conveyed his intentions to denuclearize to South Korea's envoys, specially sent by President Moon. Now the ball is in Washington's court, but what exactly does President Trump expect from the 2018 Inter-Korean Summit in Pyongyang? On this week's The Point World Affairs, we focus on America's stance and its evaluation of the situation. For that, we have with us Dr. Woo Jung-yeop from the Sejong Institute. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure.
We'll dive right into the questions after this short clip.
President Moon Jae-in, who's about to embark on a 3-day visit to Pyongyang from September 18th, has unveiled his goals for the upcoming Inter-Korean Summit through a cabinet meeting held earlier this week. If the first and second meetings serve to bring the two leaders of the U.S. and North Korea together for the first time, the third summit will likely focus on drawing out Washington and Pyongyang's concrete action plans for the future. While President Moon made it clear that complete denuclearization on the Korean Peninsula should be achieved through negotiations between the U.S. and North Korea, South Korea will continue to act as a mediator between the two countries.
이제 북한이 보유 중인 핵을 폐기하는 한 차원 더 높은 단계로 나아가려면 다시 한번 북미 양 정상 간의 통큰 구상과 대담한 결단이 필요합니다. 북한은 핵 폐기를 실행해야 하고 미국은 상응 조치로 여건을 갖춰줘야 합니다.
With that, he appealed for the two countries to show sincerity for the denuclearization agreement and the declaration of the end of the Korean War. As much as the stalled denuclearization talks have seen a breakthrough following President Moon's dispatch of special envoys to North Korea, the international community is hoping to revive the momentum with the upcoming summit. Experts also say that inter-Korean relations can hugely benefit as a result of this meeting as well. On this week's The Point World Affairs, we discuss what Seoul and Pyongyang, as well as what Washington ultimately expects to gain from the 2018 Inter-Korean Summit in Pyongyang.
It seems like the denuclearization talks have been gaining traction back. It seems like a good sign to me.
Yes, there was a concern when Secretary Pompeo's visit to the Pyongyang was cancelled at the end of August. It was caused by the letter delivered from the Kim Jong-un, North Korean deputy for the relations with the United States. So there was a concern within the United States and international community that North Korea might pull back from the dialogue with the United States. And with our special envoy to Pyongyang, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un confirmed that he's still interested in dialogue with the United States. So I think it is a great thing to know that both sides are still interested in having talks.
I understand. What will be mainly discussed in this Pyongyang summit, and to what extent do you think the leaders will agree with each other?
Broadly, we are going to discuss two main themes. One is inter-Korean relations, and the second one is denuclearization. So President Moon mentioned time to time that improving the inter-Korean relations and denuclearization process of North Korea should go together. And these days, because of the delayed talks between United States and North Korea with regard to the denuclearization process of North Korea, there was a concern that it might also slow down the pace of improving inter-Korean relations. So since we have been confirmed that North Korea is interested in solving this issue peacefully with a dialogue, and we probably have another summit between President Trump and Chairman Kim later this year. So I think in this summit, I think we can hope that there's some progress both in inter-Korean relations and the denuclearization process.
Right, so when talking about denuclearization, it seems like the United States can never be excluded from the discussion. So now let's connect to local experts and listen to what they say.
With just a few days remaining until the third Inter-Korean Summit, the White House announced that Kim Jong-un proposed a second summit between the U.S. and North Korea to President Donald Trump.
primary purpose of the letter was to request and look to schedule another meeting with the president. Certainly something that we want to take place, and we'll already continue to work on making that happen.
President Trump has also tweeted his trust towards the North Korean leader just a day after South Korean envoys paid a visit to North Korea. With the Inter-Korean Summit likely to be a stepping stone for the second round of U.S.-North Korea talks, the world's largest economy is closely following the extent to which the leaders of the two Koreas will deal with the denuclearization agenda. So what exactly does the U.S. expect to gain? We connect with local experts for more.
Let's now connect to a local expert. We have with us Harry Kazianis, the Director of Defense Studies at the Center for National Interest. Welcome, Harry.
Thanks for having me.
What is the public sentiment in Washington regarding the trips South Korean envoys made to North Korea and the results they came back with?
Well, I think it's very divided, to be honest with you. I think there are those who are very hawkish still on North Korea, which is understandable to a certain extent, considering the amount of times that North Korea has broken its word, lied about their different nuclear capabilities, gone, different agreements that just didn't work out, different interpretations from both sides on what those agreements actually mean, like the Leap Day deal and other things. So I think there's a very strong sentiment that thinks, that North Korea will never give up their nuclear weapons, and it's time to go back to maximum pressure. People like Gordon Chang and very prominent columnists and conservative scholars very much take that viewpoint. Then I think there's probably a coalition of others that are more in the realist foreign policy camp, maybe people that are on the right and actually on the left that believe that there is a chance for diplomacy here. And I think you have to look at recent events to really to make that concrete statement. I think, first of all, for Kim in his press, just in the last few days, has made quite a few positive statements that he is willing to denuclearize. There's actually a great article up on 38 North right now that talks about how Kim is sort of changing his verbiage and changing the things he's saying in the press. Very, very different from what he said last summer. And last summer, he was saying statements like, I'm never going to give up my nuclear weapons. These are my treasured sword. But now he's actually talking in the press about denuclearization. When you actually combine that with the fact that when South Korean representatives went to Pyongyang and met with Kim Jong-un, he actually volunteered that he would denuclearize by the end of Trump's first term. So it's kind of a mystery to me why he would just volunteer something like that if he wasn't serious in some respects. Now, he might ask for a lot for denuclearization. I mean, he's certainly going to want some sort of peace declaration ending the Korean War. He's probably looking for the removal of sanctions in sort of step-by-step fashion. But I'm more optimistic, I think, than I've been in a long time when it comes to North Korea. And I think the sentiment in Washington is starting to turn to that as well.
And now about that statement that Kim Jong-un agreed to completely denuclearize, his willingness to denuclearize. What do the Americans evaluate? How do Americans evaluate this?
I think Americans have had to really wrestle what their foreign policy views are. I mean, in the 1990s, we had this so-called unipolar moment where the United States was omnipotent. It could pretty much do anything anywhere it wanted in the world. And, as long as you're not tangling with the nuclear power, the repercussions are very small, unless we're talking about the servicemen and women who have to actually, do those military actions. But I think now, in terms of U.S. foreign policy, specifically towards North Korea, I think there is more of a sentiment to try to work on a compromise. But you have to remember, America has gone through multiple different regime change operations, whether we're talking about Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya. We just had an action, a military action in Syria. And to be quite frank with you, I think the American people are very tired of war. They're very tired of seeing Americans come back in body bags or, having different, mental health issues because they've seen war, plus the trillions of dollars that have been spent on regime change operations. So I think the American public's viewpoint in terms of foreign policy is starting to change. I think it's going to be really something that's going to take a generation to really crystallize that viewpoint. And I think where that sits with North Korea is that I think the American people are willing to try and see what types of compromise would be possible. I would also say, too, we have to look at North Korea through the prism of China, because the Trump administration is very focused on trying to contain the rise of Chinese power. And that's something they actually came into office to try and do right at the beginning of 2017. They couldn't do that because of North Korea obviously testing ICBMs and nuclear weapons and North Korea had to be sort of their first foreign policy objective, in terms of Asian security. But I think now that the administration is sort of settled in, understanding that China is a much bigger challenge than North Korea, and I think in the long term, I think the American people, as well as Donald Trump, are going to actually come to find South Korea as probably the best arbiter in President Moon to try and lead that effort to try and bring North Korea into the fold.
You seem to have an optimistic view on the developments on the Korean Peninsula. So what do you expect from this upcoming summit? What do you think will be achieved in this summit?
Well, I think events are building up to something probably pretty historic. I mean, just looking at events with, like I said, Kim Jong-un saying he wants to denuclearize by 2021, with the North Koreans on their 70th anniversary during their military parade, not wheeling out ICBMs. We have to remember, Kim Jong-un was probably under tremendous pressure to show his ICBMs by the North Korean military, by the apparatchik around him, the party loyalists. So for him to sort of go against that, I think is a really big deal. I think what this sets up is President Moon is going to go to North Korea, and he's probably going to say, look, we need actions on both sides. In fact, actually, this is something he's been saying right along for the last week or so. And I think what his proposal to Kim Jong-un is going to be is, look, the United States is probably willing to sign a peace declaration, as are we, as I'm sure you are as well. And in exchange for that, you're going to need to make some bold moves in terms of denuclearization. What that move could be is that Kim would hand over some sort of dossier on his nuclear program and his missiles. Now, it wouldn't be the location of those missiles or nuclear weapons, but at least a full accounting of how many warheads he has, what the yields are of those warheads, how many missiles he has. And I think, if you do keep doing things like that, where you have concessions that are done simultaneously, step by step, I think you could build trust between everybody, and you might be able to find a way out of this crisis. Now, I don't know if Kim Jong-un fully intends to denuclearize, but I think there are a lot of opportunities to ratchet down the temperature on the Korean Peninsula dramatically.
And Harry, before we let you go, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, he was anticipated to visit Pyongyang recently, but it was canceled. So do you think he will get to visit there and make that Pyongyang trip again? And if so, when do you think so?
Well, I do think he will eventually go, but I have a feeling, just my own interpretation of why it was canceled, is it was probably he was not going to meet with each other. And if you're not going to meet with the head of the North Korean state, it's probably not a good idea to go. And, they don't want the bad optics after the third visit where, Mike Pompeo was trying to spin it and say it went well, and then the North Koreans several hours later basically say it was a disaster. So I think the administration was trying to avoid that happening all over again. I do think he'll end up going, but I actually think that Kim Jong-un might actually end up coming to New York pretty soon. There's actually a pretty big article in The Atlantic, and it was a lot of detailed information from a South Korean official who basically said that there's a possibility that President Moon and Kim Jong-un could come to New York and sign a peace declaration. I wouldn't be shocked if that actually does happen. If the Inter-Korean Summit goes very well, the UN General Assembly will still be going and still be in session at that time, there still would be a little bit of time to get Moon and Kim to the UN General Assembly. We also have to factor in that Donald Trump is willing to have a second summit with Kim Jong-un. So when you factor all these different positive developments together, I really see some sort of breakthrough happening.
Thank you for your insights, Harry. This has been Harry Kazianis from the Center for National Interest in Washington, D.C. Dr. Wu, Mr. Kazianis just mentioned that there could be another summit between President Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. And he just mentioned that this could be on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly, which is going to take place very soon. So how do you see this?
So there was a discussion on the possibility of having like three-way summit at the UN General Assembly in like 27th or 8th of September. But Mr. Bolton, the National Security Advisor of the White House, recently mentioned that it might be too soon to have that kind of meeting. So he said that maybe in November, but I think realistically for considering the general election in November 6th, I think if both leaders agree, President Trump might want to have the summit sometime in October because he needs summit very soon because of all the political things that he now faces domestically. And also he wants to show that this is some kind of achievement that he made for the national security of the United States. So I think that if summit is going to take place, I think it's going to be in mid-October.
Definitely, it could not be. We still, I think, we have to wait until the Inter-Korean Summit is it's ended to find out the exact timeline of the next summit between Washington and Pyongyang. But talking about the founding day anniversary, the 70th anniversary of North Korea, which was in September 9th, it seemed like North Korea played a little bit low-key, and also including the letter that Kim Jong-un wrote to President Trump for suggesting this another summit between the two countries. What do you think about this?
So I think from Kim Jong-un's point of view that at least he should not say one thing and act the other. So while he sent a letter to President Trump asking for another summit very soon, but it's really difficult for him to convince President Trump if he shows ICBMs, which is threatening the U.S. national security. So I think that is why he did not mention anything about nuclear or the United States is their enemy, or even they did not want to show off their ICBM capabilities. So I think, as you mentioned, that they played a very low key on this celebration, even though it was 70 years of their founding day.
Mm-hmm. So this is definitely a progress.
It shows the Pyongyang's willingness to be engaged in a dialogue with the United States. So it is definitely a signal sent by Kim Jong-un to the President Trump.
Let's hear more analysis on that. Now let's connect to another expert in Washington, D.C., Michael O'Hanlon, Director of Research for the Foreign Policy Program at Brookings Institution. Good to have you on, Mike.
Thank you. Nice to be with you today.
The U.S. is a huge player in the denuclearization talks. So what does it expect from this Inter-Korean Summit in Pyongyang?
Well, as you know, historically, many Americans have wanted complete North Korean denuclearization, and that remains the goal. And that's probably true of John Bolton. That's probably true of everyone at some level. But President Trump also would like to have a major diplomatic success, something that he can call a success, even if it's short of complete denuclearization. And anything that happens with the Inter-Korean Summit that contributes to that goal would be welcome. So if somehow there's a way to sketch out the parameters of a nuclear deal, that could be very, very helpful, even though we know most of that negotiation ultimately has to be between Pyongyang and Washington. But clearly Seoul is a crucial player.
And how do you think the Pyongyang summit can be an intermediary for another meeting between Washington and Pyongyang?
Well, I think right now we seem to be stuck on even the basic idea of the kind of deal I was talking about. So some people still hope for complete denuclearization. In the United States, that's often interpreted to mean that North Korea gives up all of its bombs, all of its fissile material, and all of its production capability in one fell swoop, in one agreement. In North Korea, that is sometimes interpreted to mean an end to the alliance between the United States and the Republic of Korea and the removal of all U.S. military forces from the Korean Peninsula. I don't think that latter idea would be a good one for Washington and Seoul. And I also don't think that North Korea really is all that serious about giving up all of its nuclear weapons under any conditions. So that's why I believe we have to think more about a partial deal. And to the extent that President Moon and Chairman Kim can help essentially sketch out some of these kinds of parameters, I think that could be useful. The real negotiation probably has to happen elsewhere. But if those two leaders can begin to explain the basic kind of a trade-off, the basic kind of a compromise that we could have, I think that would be a step forward.
Thank you, Mike, for connecting with us. That has been Michael O'Hanlon from Brookings in Washington, D.C. Now, Doctor, it seems like the U.S. has high expectations from this Pyongyang summit between President Moon Jae-in and Kim Jong-un. So do you think that this could actually be burdensome for South Korean President Moon Jae-in?
We can think of two aspects that probably President Moon Jae-in has to think of considering the U.S. expectation on the summit. First one is that U.S. wants to control the pace of improving inter-Korean relations and the pace of the denuclearization process. With regard to that, if President Moon Jae-in make a real progress in denuclearization talks, that means that President Moon has more room to maneuver the current pace of improving the inter-Korean relations, and we can have enough leverage to convince the United States that this President Moon's plan actually work. So I think that this third summit between President Moon and the Chairman Kim is going to be a hard test for the Korean government and also for the truth movement for the North Korean regime. That because it's going to show whether North Korea is really interested in denuclearization and whether we can make real progress in that area. So our government is going to put every effort that they can put in here. International community has been very firm on the stance of maintaining the sanctions on North Korea, and South Korean government is pretty much well aware of that fact. So President Moon Jae-in tries to convince and persuade North Korea into moving to the direction of denuclearization, because unless North Korea denuclearizes, there is no way the South Korean government can move international community to lift the sanctions. So as North Korea already knows this, and South Korean government know that, the President Moon Jae-in is not going to make any false promise to Kim Jong-un. President Moon Jae-in is going to try to improve inter-Korean relations, but President Moon Jae-in is very well aware of that. We are not going to hurt the sanction regime on North Korea.
I understand. And now another meeting between Washington and Pyongyang is being discussed amid this preparations for the Pyongyang summit. But going further, when talking about denuclearization on the Korean Peninsula, do we know, how do you expect, when would this actually take place?
Advisor John Bolton of the NSC of White House mentioned that there was a talk about 1 year for the denuclearization. And very recently, Chairman Kim Jong-un is set to mention to Special Envoy of South Korea that he's going to denuclearize within the first term of the President Trump, which is about 2 years. So total denuclearization of the older facilities is not going to happen within 2 years, but some important part of nuclear weapon can be denuclearized within 1 or 2 years. So I think that if there's an agreement with the North Korean regime about its nuclear weapons, we can probably be able to see that fast denuclearization process within 1 or 2 years. So I don't think it's a false idea for the fast denuclearization process.
I see. That's quite exciting. It's not that long that we think of. Denuclearization sounds like it's even hard to pronounce, but it seems like an easy step that when you talk about it. Yeah.
Yes, we need more effort for that.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you for joining us today. Thank you. The 2018 Inter-Korean Summit in Pyongyang is breathing new life into the denuclearization talks that stalled in recent months. Now the world will be shifting its collective focus in Pyongyang's direction on September 18th to see if further progress can be made toward peace. That's all we have for this week's The Point World Affairs. Thank you for watching and see you next week.